My name is Emily Harper. For the last 12 years my world had been built of perfectly trimmed hedges, gleaming mailboxes, and the unwavering belief that community covenants forged an unbreakable foundation. At 38, I was the co-founder and chief architect of Haven Grove HOA, a name I had sketched on a cocktail napkin during my honeymoon with the other co-founder, my then-husband Darren Harper. We were the power couple of the suburb, the darlings of every local real estate glossy. He was the face charming, relentless, the closer with new residents. I was the engine, the one who read the fine print, who could see a peaceful gated paradise in a barren plot of scrubland, who understood that a neighborhood wasn't built on handshakes but on meticulously drafted ironclad covenants no one else ever bothered to finish reading. Our partnership felt like the perfectly edged lawns we had helped shape, solid, gleaming, and reaching for the suburban dream. The end didn't come with a bang. Came with a quiet, condescending suggestion over a neighborhood potluck where the catered brisket cost more than our first house's monthly mortgage. It was 3 weeks before the HOA's 10-year anniversary gala, an event I had been planning for months. Karen Voss, the new rising star on the board, swirled her iced tea and avoided my eyes. "You look tired, Emily," she said, the words smooth and practiced. "You've been running on empty for years. Maybe it's time you took a break. A real one. A sabbatical. Let me carry the weight for a while." I remember setting my plate down. The clink against the plastic table sounded like a gunshot in the hushed gathering. A break. Now, the annual compliance audit was in its most critical phase. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her touch, which once felt like an alliance, was now just cold and heavy. "That's exactly why you're too emotionally invested. You need perspective." "I can handle it." I pulled my hand away. Emotionally invested. I was the one who spent 3 sleepless nights reworking the covenant amendments that saved the entire community from a class action lawsuit over drainage. I was the one who saw the potential in that godforsaken plot everyone else wrote off. But I didn't argue. I just watched her. A strange cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't concern. It was a dismissal. She wasn't asking me to rest. She was asking me to disappear. The official execution came 2 days later. Not in person, but through the cold, impersonal glow of an email. The subject line was a corporate euphemism that felt like a slap. Board reorganization update. It was addressed to me, but the entire board, people I had mentored and considered friends, was copied. The body was short, brutal, and penned by a lawyer Karen had just hired. It cited irreconcilable enforcement differences and stated that effective immediately my position as Chief Covenant Officer was terminated. My access to the board portal, my email, my entire HOA life revoked in 3 sentences. She had fired me from the association that bore my soul, my sweat, and half my name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply stood up, walked to the closet, and put on the sharpest suit I owned. A charcoal gray pinstripe, the one I wore when we closed our first multimillion-dollar development deal. I drove to the Haven Grove Community Center, knuckles white on the steering wheel. I used the visitor's entrance. The security guard who had greeted me by name every morning for a decade looked at me with pained apology as he handed me a temporary badge. An intern I didn't recognize escorted me to my office to collect my personal belongings. My nameplate was already gone from the door. Inside, a small cardboard box sat on the desk where I had drafted covenants worth hundreds of millions in property values. Walking out was the longest journey of my life. The open-plan community center designed for collaboration was silent. Heads were down, eyes fixed on screens. The frantic typing of 100 keyboards the only sound. No one looked at me. They were all avoiding the plague. As I passed the glass-walled boardroom, I saw Karen inside laughing with the board. She glanced up, saw me, and her smile didn't falter. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging a stranger. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just a board maneuver. It was an eraser. I walked through the gleaming marble lobby I had designed, pushed through the heavy glass doors I had approved, and stepped out onto the concrete. The suburban air felt foreign. I was holding a box with a framed photo, a dying succulent, and a pen. I hadn't lost my board seat. I had been robbed of my community. The whispers started within hours. A text from a former assistant. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I think you should know. She's been cozying up to Chloe from the welcome committee." Chloe, of course, the 20-something former intern, now assistant compliance manager, who always wore dresses a little too tight and laughed a little too loudly at Karen's terrible jokes. The one who looked at her with sycophantic adoration I had mistaken for ambition. The betrayal wasn't just a dagger. It was a rusty serrated blade twisting. It was a pathetic cliché, and I was the star of it. A week later, the cliché was plastered across the HOA Facebook group and next door. Karen Voss, president of Haven Grove HOA, debuts new leadership at the annual gala. The photo was sickeningly perfect. Karen looking viral and triumphant, her arm wrapped possessively around Chloe's waist, and Chloe glowing, leaning against her on the sweeping veranda of my home. My home. The one in Haven Grove I had found after a year-long search. The one whose blueprints I had personally redesigned with the architect. The one whose purchase agreement had my name and only my name listed under owner. Every detail in the background of that photo was a personal wound. The hand-carved mahogany door I'd imported from Italy, the custom-forged iron lanterns, the slate tiles hand-picked from Vermont. They weren't just replacing me on the board. They were trying to install a cheap replica in my life. I felt no rage, just a profound, chilling focus. While the neighborhood gossiped and pitted poor Emily, I worked. I didn't make a single phone call. I sat at the antique writing desk in my quiet home. Yes, I never left, and began to compile my arsenal. I created a secure encrypted folder. I saved screenshots of the viral post. I downloaded the high-resolution photo. I scanned the original deed to my property. I pulled up the HOA incorporation documents, the ones we signed 12 years ago, where my 51% controlling interest as founder was enshrined. I found the file for the covenant restructuring we'd undergone 2 years prior. A move Karen had pushed for, claiming it was for modernization. She'd been so eager. I remembered the night she slid the new bylaws across the table. "It's just a formality, Emily. Same terms, new structure." I had smiled, taken the pen, and signed. She never noticed the addendum. My aunt called, her voice thick with concern. "Emily, are you okay? People are saying the most awful things." I told her I was fine. An old neighbor took me for coffee, her face a mask of sympathy. "Don't you regret it?" she whispered. "All those years you gave the HOA." I took a slow sip, looked her straight in the eye. "My only regret is that I spent so much time teaching Karen how to sign her name so beautifully. She thought I was weak. She thought I was the heartbroken, discarded founder, too emotional to fight back. She had always seen me as the creative, the dreamer, the one who dealt in aesthetics and vision, while she was the pragmatist who understood power. She forgot that while she was busy charming residents and posing for group photos, I was the one reading the covenants. I was the one who understood that true power isn't in a title or a viral post. It's in the ink on the page. The clauses she never bothered to read. The signature at the bottom of the document. She thought she had taken my neighborhood. She was about to find out she was just a tenant and the rent was due. A week after the post. It happened. The official confirmation delivered through the curated, filtered lens of the HOA Facebook group. I was scrolling when Chloe's face appeared. She was standing in the grand entryway of my home, her back to the enormous mahogany door, her hand resting on its polished surface as if she had a right to touch it. She was smiling, a wide, triumphant grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. The caption was a masterpiece of vapid audacity. Finally home in Haven Grove. New leadership starts here. I stared at the image, thumb frozen over the screen. Home. The word echoed. I thought of the day I found that door at a salvage yard in upstate New York, buried under discarded lumber. A single 12-foot slab of Honduran mahogany. I spent a fortune to restore it. I argued with Darren for a week about the expense. It's a door. Emily, he had said, exasperated. No one cares. But I did. It was the first thing you saw, the first thing you touched. It was the statement piece that said everything about the quality and care I poured into that house. And now this girl, this child in a borrowed sundress, was using it as a prop for her social media coronation. My eyes drifted to the comment section. A cascading waterfall of digital sycophancy. So happy for you. You deserve it. Girl. Living the dream. Deserve it. The phrase hung in the air. Did she deserve the heated limestone floors I had picked out? The ones that felt like walking on a warm beach even in winter? Did she deserve to stand under the custom retractable skylight I designed so we could watch the stars? Did she deserve to pose in the kitchen with the La Cornue stove that took 6 months to build in France? I clicked on her profile. It was public, of course, a testament to her thirst for validation. There were more pictures. Chloe lounging by the community pool with a champagne flute. Caption, unwinding after a long week. A selfie in my master bathroom with the Breccia Capria marble countertops I had sourced from Italy. Visible behind her, a shot of her feet propped up on the antique ottoman in my library. With every post she was laying claim to a life she hadn't built, to a world she hadn't earned. It was a performance of ownership, and her audience was eating it up. What none of them knew, what she certainly didn't know, was that her performance was taking place on a stage that was still unequivocally mine. Every single item she posed with was cataloged in a comprehensive insurance policy held by the Harper Family Trust. Policy in my name. The Persian silk rug in the great room, the mid-century furniture, the Helen Frankenthaler painting above the fireplace. They were all legally bound to me. She was living in my museum, treating my priceless artifacts like disposable props. Karen, in her predictable, brutish way, had made her move to secure her new kingdom. I heard through the grapevine that she had fired the entire household staff I had hired and trained over the years. She replaced them with a new team loyal only to her. She brought in a high-end security firm to change all the locks on the community center and install a new state-of-the-art alarm system. The old access codes were wiped. She probably slept soundly that first night, believing the fortress was secure. The drawbridge pulled up, the last vestiges of me purged. She was a woman who understood walls and locks, physical barriers for a physical world. She had no concept of the digital ghosts I had built into the neighborhood's very bones. The smart home system I had installed was one of the most advanced on the market. Controlled everything: lighting, climate, security, irrigation, even the community cameras. Karen had complained about the complexity. Why do we need an app to turn on the sprinklers? I had handled the entire setup myself, spending weeks with the technicians, learning every feature, every backdoor, every failsafe. And I had created one failsafe that no one else knew about. A hard-coded master administrative account buried layers deep in the system's architecture, accessible only through a specific IP address and multi-factor authentication. I called it the owner override. The new security system Karen had installed was impressive, but to save money she had layered it on top of the existing infrastructure. She had installed a new expensive lock on the community center door, not realizing I still held the master key to the entire castle. That night, I retrieved my old personal laptop from the back of the closet. I blew dust off the lid and plugged it in. The screen flickered to life. I navigated to the encrypted IP address from memory and hit enter. A Spartan login screen appeared. I typed the credentials. A second prompt asked for a code from an authenticator app on my phone. Access granted. A dashboard bloomed across my screen. It was a god's eye view of the entire neighborhood. I could see the log of the new alarm code being disarmed at 7:14 p.m. I saw the temperature in the community center set to a chilly 68 degree, just how Karen always liked it. Chloe must have been freezing. I saw the entry log for the side gate when the caterers for their little victory party arrived. I could see the energy consumption, the water usage for the ridiculous new fountain feature Karen had added. Even the current temperature of the wine in the community cellar, stable 55 degrees. Thankfully, they hadn't ruined my collection yet. I clicked through the submenus, heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. The control was intoxicating. I could have locked them out with a single command. I could have turned off the water, cranked the heat to 90 degrees, or set the alarm off in the middle of the night, an endless shrieking siren they couldn't disable. I could have made their new life a living hell with a few anonymous clicks. But that wasn't the plan. That was an emotional reaction. That was the move of the woman Karen thought she had discarded. No, my revenge wouldn't be petty pranks. It would be a legal and financial annihilation. For that to work, I needed them comfortable. I needed them arrogant. I needed Karen to move more money, to entangle her position deeper into the community she thought was hers. I needed Chloe to post more pictures, to brag to all her followers, to build her entire identity on being the new lady of Haven Grove. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark, but the data remained, a silent, pulsing record of their stolen lives. I didn't need to strike now. I had patience. I would let them play house in my neighborhood. I would watch from the shadows, a silent digital ghost. I would wait until they were standing on the highest turret of their imaginary castle, convinced they had won. And then, and only then, I would pull the foundation out from under them. Fools build empires on sand. I built mine on paper. Every covenant, every amendment, every brick laid in the Haven Grove monolith was underpinned by a mountain of meticulously crafted documents that I, and only I, had ever bothered to truly understand. Karen saw covenants as a formality, a tedious hurdle to be cleared before the photo op and the celebratory wine. I saw them as the very architecture of power. This was a distinction she was about to learn the hard way. The trap had been set 2 years ago, long before Chloe was anything more than a whisper in the welcome committee. Karen had come to me flushed with a new idea from a high-priced consultant, covenant restructuring. She pitched it as a way to streamline enforcement, to minimize liability, to position Haven Grove for a new decade of growth. She was practically vibrating with impatience, spreading blueprints across the community center table. What she was really proposing was the legal disembowelment of our original covenants, the ones we had signed as equals a decade prior. She wanted to create a new board structure with directors she could stack, and a more complex voting system that would dilute my direct control. She expected me to fight her, to get emotional about the community's soul. I did not. I simply listened, nodded, and after a week of feigned consideration I agreed, with one condition. The new structure is fine, I told her, looking up from the draft. But I want controlling interest. 51%. Non negotiable. She laughed, a booming condescending sound. 51%. Emily, we've always been 50-50. It's symbolic. It's not symbolic to me, I replied, voice perfectly even. It's security for the community. You're the face, Karen. You take the big risks. I'm the foundation. The foundation needs to be solid. She saw the glint in my eye not as strategy but as insecurity. She thought I was afraid of being pushed out. So she granted me the small symbolic victory. All right, she said, waving a dismissive hand. If it makes you feel better, you get your 51%. Now can we sign this thing? I've got a tea time at 9. She scribbled her beautiful worthless signature. She never read the document. Not the whole thing. She certainly didn't read Appendix B, Subclause 4A, a venomous little paragraph my personal lawyer had drafted and inserted. It stipulated that, in the event of an involuntary separation of a founding member, the ownership of all non-liquid fixed assets acquired prior to the restructuring would transitionally revert to the partner holding the majority share. In plain English, if she fired me, I got the real estate, not just the community center, but every common area, every enforcement power, every physical thing the HOA controlled, including the ability to place liens on any board member's home for misuse. She had, in her haste to get to the golf course, signed away her throne. The day after my firing, while she was likely celebrating with Chloe, I made a quiet trip downtown to the Valent Trust. It was an old money institution with thick carpets and bankers who spoke in hushed tones. I was led to the vault. Inside my safe deposit box, nestled among family jewelry, was a manila envelope containing a notarized court-stamped copy of the complete restructuring agreement, including Appendix B, Subclause 4A, with Karen's arrogant signature clearly visible. It was the Rosetta Stone of her demise. My first official move was subtle. 2 weeks after I was exiled, I had my lawyer, Dana Price, send a formal request to the HOA's legal department. It was a simple inquiry for a complete updated statement of reserve funds and a breakdown of all operational accounts. It was my right as majority interest holder. The response came not from in-house counsel, but from Karen's new personal attack dog, a man named Marcus Thorne. He called Dana, tone oozing smug condescension. Ms. Price, your client has been compensated generously for her contributions. We'd advise her not to make things unnecessarily complicated. Dana relayed the message over coffee. I smiled into my cup. Tell Mr. Thorne I appreciate his concern, but I'm not stirring up trouble. I just want to check a few numbers for my own peace of mind. The numbers I wanted to check were very specific, 11 million of them to be precise. Before the restructuring, I had established the Haven Grove Operational Stability Trust. On the surface, its purpose was to act as an emergency fund to insulate the HOA from market downturns or unexpected repairs. Everyone on the board, including Karen, had praised it as prudent. She loved telling new residents about our $11 million safety net. She thought it was the HOA's money. She was wrong. The trust was a financial Venus flytrap. I had structured it as a separate legal entity managed by the HOA but not owned by it. The very first line of the trust's charter read, "Trust established, funded, and retained by Emily Harper for the conditional use of Haven Grove HOA." Retained. That was the key. The money was my personal asset loaned to the community under specific terms. And now Karen was walking right into it through my backdoor access to the financials. A privilege of my still active 51% that her IT department hadn't figured out how to revoke. I could see the withdrawals beginning. A $250,000 transfer to a custom landscaper for Karen's new President's Garden. A $500,000 payment to a vendor for a corporate retreat in Aspen that I knew was just a ski trip for her and Chloe. Another $1 million moved to a new investment account under her name alone. She was treating my trust fund like her personal piggy bank. Each transaction was a gift. Each withdrawal was another piece of evidence. Another exhibit in the case I was building. She was proving more eloquently than I ever could that she was misappropriating funds. She thought she was living a life of newfound freedom, spending the community's money as she saw fit. She had no idea she was writing my legal brief for me, one transaction at a time. The first shot was not fired by me. It was fired by Karen with the glossy airbrushed ammunition of the local lifestyle magazine. It arrived on a Tuesday. A feature in Suburban Living spread across 6 nauseating pages. The title in flowing script declared them the power couple of the year. The cover photo was contrived domestic bliss. Karen standing behind Chloe on the great terrace of the community center. Her hands on Chloe's waist, chin resting possessively on her shoulder. She wore a cashmere sweater looking every bit the self-made queen. Chloe was in a white silk dress.
Smilinga perfect vakanto.
Behind them the sun was setting, casting a golden glow that made everything look expensive and fake. I bought a copy from the newsstand. Back home I spread it open. And then I saw it, the quote that set everything in motion. The journalist had asked her about my departure. "Emily is a brilliant creative," Karen had said, words dripping with patronizing magnanimity. But she was always very emotional, deeply invested to the point where it clouded her judgment. With the HOA poised for exponential growth, it needed a singular decisive vision. "I'm finally free to lead our community. My empire." She called me emotional. It was the oldest, most tired weapon in the book. The one women like her used to dismiss any other woman who showed passion or spine. She was painting me as hysterical, unstable, a liability she had bravely excised for the good of the neighborhood. She had not just fired me. She was rewriting history, erasing my contribution, my very identity as the architect of everything she now claimed. The cold focus I had maintained sharpened to a diamond edge. She had just handed me the invitation I'd been waiting for. I did not call a lawyer. I did not fire off an angry press release. I opened my laptop, logged into an encrypted email service under a pseudonym, and composed a new message. The recipient was Julian Finch, an investigative reporter at the Financial Chronicle, a man known for his pitbull tenacity and utter disdain for the city's self-congratulatory elite. My email was brief, almost clinical. Subject: an inquiry regarding Haven Grove HOA. Mr. Finch, I read with interest the recent feature on Karen Voss in Suburban Living. There appears to be a significant factual inaccuracy regarding the ownership structure of her empire. I have attached a document for your review that may provide some necessary clarification. Sincerely, a believer in due diligence. The attachment was a single high-resolution PDF, page 74 of the Haven Grove Restructuring Agreement. I had highlighted two things in subtle pale yellow. My name listed with 51% controlling interest and Karen's ostentatious signature at the bottom. I hit send. The trap was now baited and set. I only had to wait 48 hours. On Thursday morning, the Financial Chronicle published Finch's article online. The headline was a stark, pointed question. Who actually owns Haven Grove? Documents raise questions about President Karen Voss's empire. The article was a surgical dissection. Finch didn't make definitive claims. He simply presented the evidence. He quoted legal experts on the implications of 51% control. He referenced the emotional quote from the magazine, juxtaposing it with the cold, hard fact of the legal document. He reached out to the HOA for comment, and the article included their flustered, jargon-filled non-statement. Haven Grove's leadership structure is robust and in line with our strategic objectives. It was a corporate way of saying, "We've been caught." The internet went feral. The article was shared thousands of times on Facebook and Nextdoor. The link began to appear in the comment section of the Suburban Living feature. And then the digital horde descended upon Chloe's Instagram. Her latest post, a picture of her feet in a bubble bath in my tub, captioned "Pure Bliss," became a war zone. The fawning comments were drowned out by a tsunami of questions and accusations. Wait, so you're living in her house? Power couple of the year or homewrecker of the month? That's not her empire. Read the Financial Chronicle. Team Emily. He's just letting you borrow the place. Awkward. I watched, scrolling with detached fascination. Chloe's first reaction was to furiously delete the negative comments, but they were coming too fast. For every one she erased, 10 more appeared. After an hour, she limited the comments. 2 hours later, her profile was switched to private. The Queen of Haven Grove life had been driven from her public throne and forced to retreat behind a digital wall. Karen predictably believed she could fix the problem with the force of her personality. She booked herself an interview on Wake Up with Westwood, the city's most popular morning drive time radio show. She thought she could use her charm to respin the narrative. I listened on my kitchen radio, a cup of black coffee in my hands. There's a lot of misinformation out there, Bill. Karen began, voice smooth as silk. Emily is a wonderful woman and we built something incredible together. But in any separation, business or personal, feelings get hurt. She was compensated very adequately for her role. This is just a case of someone trying to stir up drama. The documents being circulated are taken out of context from a complex agreement. Adequately compensated. The lie was so bold, so absolute. She was painting me as a greedy ex-founder, paid off and still bitter. While she was still speaking, I was already typing. I sent another email, this time directly to the public address for the show's producer. Subject: live fact check for MS. Voss. To the producer of Wake Up with Westwood. Your current guest Karen Voss has just stated on air that her former partner Emily Harper was adequately compensated for her shares. This is a materially false statement. Attached is a sworn affidavit from MS. Harper signed this morning attesting that she has received no compensation whatsoever. I attached the affidavit Dana had prepared that very morning. I knew she would lie and I was ready. I heard the rustle of paper through my speakers. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Bill Westwood cleared his throat. Karen, he said, tone shifting from friendly to cautious. We're getting some real-time information here from our listeners. We've just received a document. It appears to be a legal affidavit that claims, well, it directly contradicts what you just said about MS. Harper being compensated. It says here she hasn't received a dime. Karen stammered. Well, that's a procedural matter. The funds are in escrow. It's a complicated process. She was unraveling live on the air for hundreds of thousands of people to hear. Her charm had evaporated, replaced by the desperate, slippery words of a woman caught in a lie. Westwood cut her off. We're out of time for this segment. Karen, thanks for coming in. He went to a commercial break. When he came back, his final words before playing a song were a hook tossed out to the entire city. A fascinating morning here. It seems the story of Haven Grove HOA and the Harpers may not be over. Not by a long shot. I turned off the radio. The apartment was silent again. The storm hadn't passed. It had just made landfall. And I was the one controlling the weather. The public relations battle was won. Now the war moved from the court of public opinion to a court of law, a far more brutal and less forgiving arena. The day after Karen's disastrous radio interview, I met my lawyer Dana Price at a small unassuming cafe tucked away on a cobblestone side street miles from the glass and steel canyons of the financial district. Dana was in her late 40s with a mind as sharp as the crease in her trousers and a demeanor perpetually calm. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a thin file across the small wooden table. The public response was robust, she said, a faint hint of a smile touching her lips. She played right into our hands. Now we proceed. I've drafted the preliminary filings. We can file for an immediate injunction to freeze all major HOA assets, including the trust. We can file a suit for wrongful termination and another for breach of covenant based on the restructuring agreement. We can, Emily, if you want, take back every single brick of Haven Grove. She paused, her gaze direct and serious. But this is the point where you have to tell me the objective. What is your endgame? Do we want a settlement? A buyout? Do we want to burn it to the ground and walk away with the ashes? Tell me where you want to stop. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the warmth seep into my hands. I looked out the window at people passing by, living their ordinary lives, oblivious to the suburban empire being contested over a chipped ceramic mug. I had thought about this question every minute of every day since I'd walked out of that community center with my life in a cardboard box. What did I want? It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the house. It was something more fundamental. I want to stop, I said, turning my gaze back to hers. voice quiet but absolute, when she understands that the thing she thinks she built was mine from the very beginning. I want her to stand in the ruins of her own arrogance and realize that I was the foundation she stood on, and I was the one who decided to let it crumble.
Dana nodded slowly.
So no settlement. Unconditional surrender. Precisely. The following morning, the first official volley was fired. Dana's office dispatched a set of legal notices via courier to the Haven Grove Community Center. They weren't lawsuits yet. They were something colder, more menacing. The first was a shareholder demand for emergency audit citing my 51% ownership and invoking clauses in the corporate bylaws that gave me the right to scrutinize every financial transaction. It specifically named the $11 million Operational Stability Trust. The second was a notice of pending litigation and demand for verification of asset ownership, which formally questioned the legal status of all fixed assets, including the community center and my own home, citing Appendix B subclause 4A of the restructuring agreement. Karen's reaction was immediate and volcanic. She didn't call me or Dana. She issued a community-wide memo which was of course immediately leaked to the press. It was a masterpiece of self-pity and rage disguised as leadership. It is with a heavy heart, it began, that I must inform you that my former partner Emily Harper has initiated a baseless and malicious legal action against the community we built together. This is a transparent and vindictive attempt to sabotage Haven Grove out of personal bitterness. I want to assure our residents, our partners, and our investors that this is nothing more than a desperate act of a disgruntled individual. We will not be distracted. We will fight this with all our resources and continue to build the future. I read the memo on my phone and felt nothing but distant clinical pity. She was still performing, still playing the role of the strong-wronged leader. She didn't understand that no one was listening anymore. While she was busy drafting her defiant manifesto, the gears of a much larger machine were beginning to turn. In turn, did nothing. I issued no statement. Dana's office replied to press inquiries with a curt, "We do not comment on pending legal matters." My silence was a vacuum, and into that vacuum speculation and doubt rushed in. The market began to get nervous. Haven Grove property values, which had been on a steady climb, dipped 5 points, then 10. Her residents weren't listening to her defiant speeches. They were reading the cold language of Dana's legal notices. The real blow, however, came from a direction Karen never saw coming. Dana's demand for an audit had triggered an automatic flag within the banking system. A trust fund established and retained by one individual from which millions were being transferred into the personal accounts of another individual who had just fired the first looked less like a community transaction and more like a textbook case of embezzlement. A week after Dana sent her letters, a quiet, polite man in an ill-fitting suit from the state attorney general's office paid a visit to Haven Grove's chief financial officer. He wasn't there to make accusations. He was just there to ask for records. Specifically all records pertaining to the $11 million fund with the unclear sourcing. The news of the state investigation ripped through the financial community like a shockwave. This was no longer a messy board dispute. This was a state-level investigation. This was the kind of trouble that didn't just end with losing a title. It ended with frozen assets, public indictments, and possible prison time. The word fraud began to appear in the local blogs. Lenders got nervous. A major line of credit for community improvements was suddenly put under review. The foundation I had built and which she had taken for granted was beginning to show its cracks. That's when she finally broke. The email arrived late on a Thursday night. It was from her personal account, not her official one. The subject line was a single word, Emily. The bravado was gone. The anger, the public posturing, the defiant declarations, all of it had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, panicked core of the woman. The message was just 4 words, "We need to talk." I stared at the words on the screen. She wasn't asking. She was begging. She had been a queen in a borrowed castle, and she could hear the sound of the rightful owner's armies at the gates. She wanted to negotiate the terms of her surrender. She thought there was still a deal to be made, a way to salvage some part of her stolen life. She still didn't understand. I clicked reply. My fingers were steady on the keyboard. My response was even shorter than her plea. In court, I hit send. There was nothing more to say. The rain began in the late afternoon. A soft apologetic drizzle that by nightfall had turned into a relentless driving downpour. It was the kind of weather that mirrored the inside of my soul, a cold cleansing fury. The headlights of my car cut a path through the slick black asphalt of the private road leading up to Karen's home. Each turn was a memory. Each tree a landmark from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. As I rounded the final bend, the house came into view. It wasn't a house. It was a statement. A sprawling custom-built monument to self-importance. Its wide windows blazing with a warm golden light that defied the storm. It looked like a scene from a magazine, a perfect image of wealth and happiness. My image, my design, my community. In the manicured front lawn, a large professionally made sign had been staked into the sodden grass. Happy 50th birthday, Karen. It read in cheerful looping font, surrounded by deflating rain-beaten balloons. They had been celebrating. Good. The higher the climb, the more devastating the fall. I didn't park in the circular driveway. I left the car on the access road, the engine ticking softly in the rain as I walked the final 100 yards. The gravel crunched under my sensible heels, a sound I knew so well. I was not dressed for a fight. I was dressed for a business transaction in a tailored black coat and carrying a slim leather portfolio. The cold rain plastered strands of hair to my face. But I didn't care. I felt nothing but a profound glacial calm standing before the massive mahogany door. My door. In spirit. I could hear the faint thrum of music from within and the sound of laughter. The party was over, but the glow of it remained. I reached out and pressed the doorbell. The chime, a soft three-note melody I had chosen, echoed inside, a polite, civilized sound completely at odds with the violence I was about to commit. I waited. The seconds stretched, each one marked by the drumming of rain on the portico roof. Finally, the lock clicked and the heavy door swung inward. It was Chloe. She was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking silver dress that was now slightly wrinkled. Her professionally applied makeup was smudged and her hair, once a perfect confection of curls, was starting to fall. She was holding a half-empty glass of champagne. Her face, flushed from the party, went through a rapid series of expressions. First a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition, and finally a mask of pure, unadulterated loathing. "What are you doing here?" she spat, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She instinctively moved to block the doorway as if her small frame could possibly keep me out. I didn't answer her question. I didn't even truly look at her. She was an irrelevance, a temporary placeholder. I opened the portfolio I was carrying and removed a thick sheath of papers bound with a blue legal ribbon and stamped with the seal of the county court. I held it out for her to see. "This is a court-ordered notice of asset repossession for the HOA presidency and all related assets located at Haven Grove," I said, my voice steady and devoid of all emotion. "You have 24 hours to vacate the role and the premises." Her face went blank. The words didn't seem to register. She just stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. "What? That's insane. You can't." Karen's voice came from the hallway behind her. She appeared, shrugging on a blazer over her unbuttoned blouse. She still had the look of a woman coasting on the high of being the center of attention. She saw me and the jovial post-party expression on her face faltered, but she recovered quickly, plastering on the charming, placating smile she used to disarm angry residents. "Emily, honey, what is this?" she said, gently moving Chloe aside. She took a step forward into the doorway, trying to create a shield between me and her new life. "It's late and it's my birthday." "I'm aware," I said, Think of this as my gift. She glanced at the papers in my hand, a flicker of genuine confusion in her eyes. She still didn't get it. She still thought she was in control. Okay, look, she said, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper, her eyes darting to the darkness beyond the driveway. Whatever this isn't the way to do it. Let's be adults. My neighbors can see your car. People are watching. That was always her greatest fear. Not failure, not poverty, not even a broken reputation. Her greatest fear was a crack in the facade. The thought of what the neighbors might think was more horrifying to her than any legal document. I didn't look at the neighbors. I looked at her. I let the silence hang in the air, broken only by the sound of the storm. Then I lifted my hand and pointed past her toward the elegant wrought iron plaque affixed to the stone pillar at the end of the driveway, illuminated by a spotlight. What does that sign say, Karen? I asked. She frowned. What are you talking about? The sign, I repeated, my voice cold and hard as the rain. The one we commissioned when we built this place. Read it for me. She glanced over her shoulder, confused. It says the Harper residence. So what exactly? I said. The Harper residence. It doesn't say the Karen Voss residence. It was never your name, Karen. It was ours. And when you dissolved the partnership, you gave up the name and everything attached to it. She stared at me. The color began to drain from her face as the meaning of my words, the implications of Appendix B subclause for a, finally crashed into her consciousness. The charming smile didn't just fade, collapsed, leaving behind the slack-jawed, terrified face of a woman who had just realized the game was over and she had lost before she even knew she was playing. She was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Chloe looked back and forth between us, her eyes wide with panic, finally understanding that this was far more than a jilted founder making a scene. I took a step back, pulling the legal notice away. My work here was done. I looked her directly in the eye one last time. You replaced me, Karen. An easy enough thing to do, I suppose, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper yet carrying more weight than any shout. But you made a fatal business error. You forgot to check who owned the assets. I turned my back on them, on the warm light, on the remnants of their stolen celebration. I walked away, the rain washing over me, feeling like absolution. I didn't look back. I heard the sound of the great mahogany door closing with a heavy final thud. The sound was swallowed almost instantly by a deafening clap of thunder, a roar from the heavens that seemed to shake the very ground, washing away any pathetic justification or desperate plea. The showdown at the mansion was the lightning strike. The corporate collapse was the thunder that followed, a rolling, deafening peal that shook the suburb's financial foundations. My legal filings combined with the state AG's sudden and very public interest had created the perfect storm. The bank which had backed Haven Grove for years based on Karen's charm and my meticulous accounting was no longer charmed. They were terrified. Exactly 1 week after I walked away from her front door, the news broke. Valiant Trust, citing the ongoing state investigation and significant irregularities discovered during a preliminary review of the Operational Stability Trust, had frozen every single HOA account belonging to Haven Grove. They invoked a material adverse change clause, a piece of boilerplate legal ease I myself had negotiated into our credit agreements years ago as a safeguard. The community's cash flow, its lifeblood, was choked off in an instant. Payroll couldn't be met. Contractors couldn't be paid. The engine of the empire had seized. The fallout was immediate and digital. Chloe, a creature of social media, reacted in the only way she knew how. She posted a story to her now private Instagram account, which was of course screenshotted and leaked within minutes. It was a short, tearful video filmed in what looked like a sterile hotel room. Her face was puffy, her voice thick with self-pity. I just don't understand why people have to be so cruel online, she sobbed into her phone's camera. We were happy. People just want to tear you down. She spoke as if the state investigation was a mean comment, as if the freezing of an $11 million fund was a form of cyberbullying. It was so pathetic, so utterly devoid of comprehension. I almost felt a flicker of pity for her. Almost. She was a casualty of a war she never even knew she was fighting. Karen, on the other hand, understood the gravity of the situation. She knew she couldn't charm her way out of a state investigation. She did what she always did when cornered. She tried to control the stage. She called an emergency press conference in the lobby of the community center, a lobby she no longer technically owned. She stood at a podium flanked by her lawyer Marcus Thorne, looking haggard and diminished. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle energy. She read from a prepared statement, voice strained. She announced that in light of the unfounded and distracting inquiries, she would be temporarily transferring operational control of Haven Grove to the existing board of directors. She framed it as a noble act, a move to protect the community from her personal legal battles. Haven Grove is more than one person, she said, eyes scanning the room of reporters. I am stepping aside to allow this great community to continue its work without distraction. It was a transparent lie. She wasn't stepping aside. She was being pushed off a cliff. The phrase temporary transfer fooled no one. The sharks smelled blood in the water. Before the press conference was even over, phones were ringing. The resident exodus began, not as a trickle but as a flood. Property owners who had bought into the Haven Grove dream were now desperately trying to sell before values became worthless. Prices plummeted by 40% in a single afternoon. Her empire wasn't just collapsing. It was being liquidated in a public panic sale. A few days later, I returned to the community center. The security guard at the front desk, a new face I didn't recognize, barely glanced at the court order I presented that granted me, as majority interest holder, full access to the premises. The building was a ghost town. The once bustling lobby was silent and empty. In the elevator, the digital display that usually scrolled through Haven Grove's recent triumphs was frozen on a generic stock image of a suburban street. The doors opened onto the main office floor, and the scene was one of quiet devastation. It was a battlefield after the fighting was over. The lights were dimmed to save energy. Most of the desks were empty, cleared of personal effects. A few lone cardboard boxes sat on chairs filled with mugs and picture frames abandoned by board members who had been let go or had simply read the writing on the wall and fled. The air, which once buzzed with the energy of 100 ambitious people, was still and smelled faintly of dust and defeat. I walked the familiar path to my old office. My nameplate was still missing from the door. Inside, someone had been using it as a temporary storage room. Boxes of useless marketing materials featuring Karen's smiling face were stacked against the wall. As I stood there taking in the wreckage of our shared dream, a voice came from behind me. "We knew you'd come back." I turned. It was Maria, a senior project manager who had been with us from the beginning. She was one of the few people left, a skeleton crew trying to answer phones that no longer rang. Her face was tired, but her eyes were clear and steady. "We knew you wouldn't let her just burn it all down," she said, voice soft but firm. I offered her a small, sad smile, a silent acknowledgement of her loyalty. I said nothing. There were no words that could capture the maelstrom of emotions inside me. A cold, satisfying vengeance mingled with a profound grief for what we had once been. The final act took place not in a courtroom or a mansion, but in the sterile quiet of Dana's conference room. The documents were spread across the polished mahogany table. It was a mountain of paper that represented a decade of my life, the final transfer of power. With the HOA in receivership and Karen stripped of all executive authority pending the investigation, my 51% controlling interest was no longer a theoretical concept. It was an iron fist. The board, facing total financial ruin, had voted unanimously to accept my proposal. A complete buyout of all remaining shares funded by a new line of credit I had secured with a rival bank. In exchange, I would assume all of Haven Grove's considerable debt and liabilities. They were signing away a dying community. I was reclaiming my kingdom. Dana pointed to the final signature line. This is it, Emily. You sign this and Haven Grove HOA in its entirety is yours. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I thought of Karen's condescending smile, of Chloe's smug Instagram posts, of the email that had shattered my world. I thought of the long nights, the sacrificed weekends, the sheer force of will it had taken to build this community. My signature was not the angry slashing mark of a woman scorned. It was calm, deliberate, and perfectly legible, Emily Harper. I owned the name. I owned the community. I owned it all. Dana had allowed one photographer into the room, a young woman from the Financial Chronicle. As I finished my signature, a single flash went off, capturing the moment. The photo was online an hour later. It was a simple, powerful image. My hand holding a pen signing a document. In the background, the Haven Grove logo was just visible on a binder. The reporter Julian Finch had written a single devastating caption that went viral almost instantly. It became the headline on every local blog, the top trend on Nextdoor. The woman she fired now owns her empire. With ownership came the deluge. The community I reclaimed was a sinking ship weighed down by debt, broken contracts, and a reputation in tatters. My days were a blur of meetings with bankers, lawyers, and the skeletal remains of my senior staff. We were in triage, working 18-hour days to staunch the bleeding, to restructure the debt, to reassure the few residents who hadn't already jumped ship. I didn't have time to gloat. I barely had time to sleep. The email arrived at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, a time when only the desperate or the damned are awake. The sender was Chloe Marks. The subject line was simply, "I'm so sorry." I stared at the notification on my phone for a long moment, the blue light harsh in the darkness of my reclaimed home. My first instinct was to delete it unread. Curiosity, a cold and clinical variant of it, stayed my hand. I opened it. The message was a rambling, punctuation-starved paragraph of pure desperation. Emily, I know you hate me and you have every right to, but I have to tell you I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the extent of what she did to you. She told me you two had grown apart and decided to end the partnership amicably. She said you wanted to retire. She lied to me about everything. I was so stupid. I believed her. I lost everything because of her. And now everyone online is saying these horrible things. And I just wanted to say I'm sorry for my part in it. I truly am. It was the confession of a fool, not a villain. She wasn't apologizing for what she did. She was apologizing for being caught on the losing side. There was no remorse in her words, only the stench of fear and the pathetic plea of someone trying to avoid the consequences of her own choices. I felt a brief hollow pang of something that resembled pity. She was a pawn in a game she never understood. And now that her queen had been toppled, she was left exposed and useless on the board. I held my thumb over the reply button. What could I possibly say? Thank you for your belated and self-serving apology. You should have known better. There was nothing to say. Any response would be a form of engagement, of validation. It would grant her a role in my story that she hadn't earned. My silence had been my greatest weapon. There was no reason to abandon it now. I closed the email and archived it without a reply. 2 days later, my assistant buzzed my new, still sparsely decorated office. Ms. Harper, there's a Ms. Chloe Marks here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. I looked up from the financial projections spread across my desk. Through the frosted glass wall of my office, I could see a vague silhouette in the waiting area. I felt a surge of irritation. The audacity was breathtaking. Tell her I'm not available. My assistant's voice came back strained. She says she'll wait. She says it's a matter of life and death. I sighed. A long, weary exhalation. This was a loose end I needed to tie up. Fine. Send her in. Give me 2 minutes, then come in and tell me I have a conference call. The door opened and Chloe shuffled in. The woman who entered my office was not the glowing, triumphant goddess from the magazine cover. She was a ghost. She wore a cheap-looking coat over a wrinkled blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail and her face was pale and blotchy, stripped of its glamorous war paint. Her eyes, wide and haunted, darted around the room, taking in the skeletal framework of my new beginning. She stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, clutching her handbag like a life raft. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. I didn't ask her to sit. I simply looked at her, my expression neutral. "You have 1 minute." Tears immediately welled in her eyes. "Please," she stammered, taking a shaky step forward. "I have nothing." She cut me off completely. "My accounts are frozen because of the investigation. I can't even pay my rent. I'll do anything. I'll work for free. I can answer phones, get coffee, anything. I just need a job. Please, I can do anything." Her words hung in the air, a pathetic echo of a promise I had heard 1,000 times before. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. I looked past her through the glass wall at the trading floor of my community, at the people working diligently to salvage the wreckage she and Karen had created. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, almost conversational. It was not angry. It was not cruel. It was a simple statement of fact, a piece of ancient history unearthed. "She used to say that to me," I said. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her face crumpled. A choked, guttural sob escaped her throat. She finally understood. She wasn't the first woman to offer her everything. She was just the latest in a line. The one who had been foolish enough to believe her promises were unique to her. She saw in that moment not a rival but a reflection of her own naivete, a ghost of her future. She didn't say another word. She turned and fled, her desperate sobs trailing behind her. My assistant opened the door a moment later. "Your conference call, Ms. Harper." "Cancel it," I said, my eyes still fixed on the empty doorway. "It's been handled." The final pieces fell into place with the cold, impersonal finality of a news cycle. A week later, the Financial Chronicle reported that Chloe Marks's personal assets were being investigated as part of the larger Haven Grove fraud case. The expensive jewelry, the sports car, the designer wardrobe, all were being scrutinized as potential proceeds of crime. She was no longer just the mistress. She was a person of interest. Then came the final nail in Karen's coffin. She was formally indicted by a state grand jury on multiple counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. As part of a pretrial agreement to avoid a longer sentence, she was permanently barred from ever serving as an officer or director of any homeowners association. Her career was over. Her name was a toxic asset. She had flown too close to the sun on wings made of my money, and now she had been burned so badly she would never fly again. My victory was complete, but it was quiet. There was no champagne, no triumphant party. There was only the steady, relentless work of rebuilding. A month later, I agreed to my first and only television interview. I sat across from a well-known CNBC anchor in a cold, brightly lit studio. I wore a simple, elegant white blazer. Conscious choice. It was the color of a clean slate. The anchor asked all the predictable questions about the community's future, about market confidence, about the lessons learned. Then she leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "Emily," she said, voice dropping conspiratorially. "Everyone wants to know. After such a public and brutal betrayal, the world watched you dismantle her life piece by piece. Was it all just revenge?" I smiled, a small, controlled movement of my lips. I looked directly into the camera, into the millions of eyes watching, wondering. I thought of my long, calculated silence, of the documents in the vault, of the digital ghosts in the smart home system. I thought of how she had screamed her innocence on the radio while I had simply sent a quiet email. "Revenge is a noisy, emotional word," I said, my voice calm and even. I prefer to think of it as a strategic recalibration of assets. I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final line, the one that would define the entire affair. Sometimes silence signs louder than revenge. I had been living back in the house for 3 weeks. It was not a home. Not yet. It was a reclaimed territory, a vast silent space that echoed with the ghosts of a life I was methodically exorcising. I worked from the library, a room Karen had always found too dark and stuffy, but which I had always loved for its scent of leather and old paper. The walls were lined with the books I had collected, the covenants I had written, the foundations of the world she had tried to steal. The first week I had the entire house professionally deep cleaned as if to scrub away the residue of their presence. The second week I donated every piece of clothing they had left behind, every trinket Chloe had purchased, every monument to their brief illegitimate reign. I was not redecorating. I was decontaminating. I moved through the rooms with the dispassionate efficiency of a liquidator, cataloging assets, changing digital passcodes, and reasserting my quiet absolute dominion. The call came on a Thursday evening just as dusk was bleeding purple and orange across the sky. I was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows in the great room looking out over the infinity pool which was still reflective as a sheet of black glass. The caller ID was a blocked number, but I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones who it was. I let it ring 4 times, a small petty assertion of control before I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice even. Silence, then a ragged, unfamiliar sound. It was Karen's voice but stripped of its familiar timbre of command and confidence. It was the voice of a woman hollowed out. "Emily," I replied, my tone giving away nothing. I could hear the sound of her breathing, shaky and thin. "I'm at a payphone," she said, as if that explained everything. "They took my cell, my lawyer's advice." "A wise lawyer," I said. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Yeah, well, a little late for wise advice." Another pause stretched, filled only by the distant sound of traffic on her end of the line. "I saw the news," she finally said, "about the indictment. They're going to take everything. The accounts my father left me, the condo downtown, everything." She paused and I could hear the question coming, the one she had called to ask. "I've lost it all, Emily. Everything. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" Her words were meant to be a blade, to paint me as the vengeful destroyer, to burden me with the guilt of her ruin. She wanted me to feel the weight of her destruction, to admit that this entire elaborate brutal campaign had been born of simple ugly spite. She was offering me the role of the villain in the final act of her tragedy. I refused to play the part. "No," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent house. "Not yet." She was clearly taken aback. "Not yet? What more could you possibly take from me?" I turned from the window and began to walk slowly through the cavernous room, my footsteps silent on the silk rug I had chosen. "You keep saying everything, Karen. But you don't understand the word. My half of the partnership we built over 12 years. My professional reputation. The last 10 years of my life. You bundled all of that up and handed it to your replacement as a housewarming gift." I stopped in front of the cold black marble fireplace. "So no, I'm not happy. Not when you stand there talking about everything you've lost and you still don't comprehend that I was a part of that everything you so carelessly threw away." A raw guttural sound of pure rage crackled through the phone. "I threw nothing away. I built that community. You think you won? You didn't win. You just manipulated the fine print. You have nothing. Nothing but a pile of old papers." Her words meant to wound had the opposite effect. They clarified everything. She still didn't see me. Not really. She saw a loophole, a technicality. She didn't see the architect. She saw the footnote. I walked back toward the library, pushing open the heavy oak door. On the massive desk, illuminated by a single lamp, sat a stack of documents. The deed to the house, the incorporation papers, the notarized copy of the restructuring agreement, the paper trail that had led me home. I looked at the beautiful archaic calligraphy on the deed, the seals and signatures that represented the bedrock of reality. "That's where you're wrong," I replied, my voice imbued with a calm she could never hope to understand. I let my fingers trail over the thick, crisp edge of the deed. "The paper is the power, Karen. You were so busy building a brand, posing for pictures, telling a story. You forgot that stories burn. But the paper endures." The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't confusion or anger. It was the heavy, dead silence of comprehension, the final dawning horror of a woman who realized she'd been checkmated from the very first move. "God," she whispered, her voice cracking. Only you could win like this. So cold." She was still trying to cast me as the monster, the unfeeling, calculating ice queen. She needed that to make sense of her own failure. I would not allow her that final comfort. "No, Karen," I said, and my voice was sharp now, a final, precise incision. "You're wrong about that too. This isn't about being cold." I leaned against the desk, looking out through the library doors back at the pool, at the reflection of the house's lights shimmering on the dark surface. Only someone who has been told they are replaceable knows exactly how to return the lesson. I didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing more she could say that mattered. I pressed the end call button on my phone screen, and the line went dead. The silence that rushed back in was no longer empty. It was full. It was the sound of finality. I stood there for a long time, looking out at the water. The lights from the house trembled on the surface, looking hard and bright like scattered shards of metal. A chapter of my life, the most defining chapter, had just closed. There was no swell of triumphant music, no feeling of elation. The victory did not feel warm or joyful. Felt correct. It was the righting of a fundamental wrong. The brutal, necessary balancing of an equation. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was the right one. And in the profound, echoing silence of my house, that was more than enough. The end was not a celebration. It was a restoration. The months that followed were a grueling, methodical process of reclamation. I wasn't just rebuilding a community. I was excavating my own legacy from the rubble Karen had left behind. I worked with the clinical precision of a surgeon, cutting away the toxic departments she had created, suturing the financial wounds and breathing life back into the core of the neighborhood, the part that had always been mine. The Haven Grove Community Center was reborn. The ostentatious gold-plated logo in the lobby was the first thing to go, replaced by a simple, elegant inscription in brushed steel. The upper floors, which Karen had converted into a playground of superfluous executive lounges and synergy rooms, were gutted and redesigned into practical collaborative workspaces. The atmosphere changed from one of fearful sycophancy to quiet, focused ambition. People no longer walked on eggshells. They walked with purpose. We were smaller now, leaner, but we were solid. We were real. My office was the last space to be completed. It was the same corner office with the panoramic view of the neighborhood I had helped build, but it was unrecognizable. The dark, heavy furniture Karen had favored was gone, replaced with clean lines of glass, steel, and light oak. The walls were a soft, calming white. There were no pictures of me shaking hands with minor celebrities, no trophies celebrating meaningless awards. There was only one piece of art, one statement. On the wall behind my desk, it was the Haven Grove logo, newly designed, and beneath it, etched into a plaque of polished granite, were 4 simple words. Founded by Emily Harper. I was standing there, my hand resting on the cool stone of the plaque, when the television crew arrived. I had agreed to one interview, a primetime special on a major business network. It was not an act of ego. It was a closing statement, the final entry in the public record. For weeks I had been the subject of speculation, a mythological figure in a suburban drama. They called me the Ice Queen, the Black Widow of real estate, They spun tales of my cold, calculating revenge. It was time to replace their fiction with my fact. They transformed my serene office into a chaotic tangle of lights, cameras, and cables. The anchor, a woman famous for her sharp, incisive questions, sat across from me. She was professional, but I could see the curiosity glinting in her eyes. She wanted the salacious details. She wanted the story of the scorned founder. We spent 20 minutes talking about the market, about the community's new direction, about the future of suburban development. I answered her questions calmly and concisely, giving her facts and figures, not emotion. I was in control of the narrative. Finally, as the producers signaled they were nearing the end of the segment, she leaned forward, her expression softening into one of feigned intimacy. "Emily," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "it's an incredible story, a comeback for the ages. But you've had to endure so much speculation, so much gossip. There were many people in the suburb who wrote you off, who sided with your ex-president, who doubted you every step of the way." She paused, letting the weight of the question hang in the air. "What would you say right now to all those people who ever doubted you?" This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. The moment for the tearful confession. The angry tirade. The emotional climax. They wanted a sound bite that would trend on Nextdoor for days. I did not raise my voice. I did not change my posture. I simply met her gaze, and through her the gaze of the millions watching. I thought of Karen's belief that her name was the only one that mattered. I thought of Chloe living in my house believing that possession was ownership. I thought of the residents who believed the story and never bothered to read the covenant. They had all made the same fundamental mistake. Never. I began, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand, build an empire on someone else's foundation. For a single perfect second there was absolute silence in the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the studio lights. Then a photographer positioned just off camera raised his lens. A single brilliant flash of light erupted, bleaching the world white for a heartbeat. In that frozen moment, a small knowing smile finally touched my lips. It was not a smile of joy or of happiness. It was a smile of finality, the smile of an architect who looks upon her finished work and knows that it is sound, that it is true, and that it is hers. The image would freeze there, a still frame of a woman in her power, the author of her own story, finally stepping out from the shadows of her own creation. Then a hard cut. The screen would go black. A new image would appear. A shot of the wrought iron plaque at the entrance to the Haven Grove property. The morning light is clean and sharp. The sign is new. The letters crisp and clear against the dark metal. It reads Haven Grove Estate, Owner E. Harper. There is no music. No dramatic score. The only sound is the gentle ambient whisper of the wind rustling through the leaves of the great oak trees that line the drive and the distant rhythmic sloshing of water from the pool's filter system. It is the sound of a quiet, ordinary Thursday morning. The sound of life simply continuing. The screen fades to black again and a single line of white text appears, stark and absolute. She replaced me with her protégé. I replaced her with the truth. The text holds for 5 seconds, then slowly fades away, leaving only darkness. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm so curious to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Emily's journey. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And for extra support, hit that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners who need to hear it. Thank you again for being here.